people that I would like you to meet. The first one is a very noted and most admired photographer. His name is Carlos Betancourt. Carlos, where are you? Could you please get up? As you can see, Cubans and Puerto Ricans produce beautiful men. Carlos Betancourt is a very well-known photographer and installation artist. He has works, among other places, at the collection of the Smithsonian Museum of American Art in Washington, D.C., the Loeb Art Museum in Coral Gables, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Now, why Carlos? I will tell you why. Now, back in 2002, among many works of art that we all love, Carlos did a beautiful photograph called Magic City. And we happen to have a copy of it, and our copy is 10 feet by 10 feet. So no one can say I cannot see the details. And what happens there is that it has to do with the Taino god, the god of grief. And the person playing the Taino god is Richard Blanco. So I thought it would be interesting to make them one more time. So when all of this is over, I would like to encourage all of you to get back into the galleries, go to the balcony on the second floor, and look at that breathtaking photograph that Carlos took of Richard Blanco as the god of grief. Now, the other very special guest, and he's not Cuban, is Ben Crandall. Ben Crandall is a New York native who has served the South Florida Sun Sentinel as a designer, a writer, and editor for over 16 years. He currently handles South Florida arts and entertainment coverage in his blog. Mr. Crandall's special assignment this afternoon will be to MC our gathering as well as interviewing Mr. Blanco. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Betancourt, Mr. Crandall, and of course, Richard Blanco.
I am not Richard Blanco. You can imagine what an honor it is for me to be up here to share the stage with someone who's been such a part of this time in our lives. If any of you have seen saw the Inaugural and heard this poem today, you understand again what an honor this is. First, I'd just like to acknowledge that we're here at the museum, and it wasn't too long ago that Jane Monheit, the jazz singer, sang in this room. Augusta Burroughs will be here next weekend, and it's good to know that the museum and books and books across the way has become such a hub of cultural activity in downtown Fort Lauderdale. It wasn't always the case, and I think it's just something that should be appreciated. Again, without further ado, Richard Blanco.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you so much. It's indeed an honor and a pleasure to be here. In in more ways than one. Of course, you all know that South Florida is my home away from home, no matter where I'm at. So that's one very special thing, of course. And the other thing is that in some ways, this reading tonight and this event has been years in the making. As Jorge was sort of pointing or alluding to, we've been circling around each other about doing something someday, and it's finally happening. So it's such a pleasure to actually be here and be able to have this conversation with everyone. It's not, for me, it's not a typical poetry reading in that I get to discuss some really interesting things and things about my past and my life and arts and my connection to Carlos's work that I think and I hope you'll find interesting. While this is not a lecture on Carlos's work, because I don't feel qualified as an art historian or anything like that I will share with you, Carlos has been in my life for, well, we don't want to date each other, but let's say 5 years. Actually, that piece that's up there was only taken 3 years ago. They still look like that. But in reality, it has been a long time, and in fact, from the very first days that I started writing, that I was a little wet behind the ears engineer who was like doodling with poetry. And in some ways, in many ways, Carlos introduced me to this whole slew. Carlos was already Carlos in South Beach, to this whole slew of wonderful artists, community, including some of which are here with us tonight. And we're talking when we're in our 20s now. And those wonderful years when you're just sort of developing your own sense of the world, and Carlos and I and friends, just sitting around and talking about art and talking about possibilities and talking about things. And one of the things that is still with me today, and that I think Carlos and I were just talking about the other day, was something that I'm not sure he's dropped out of his vocabulary or not, but this idea of fracturalism, that it was a term that he coined. And what that meant to us back then, if I remember correctly, was this idea that we are people that are assembled from all these little bits and pieces. And by us, we took it to mean us, and back then again in our 20s, that us was sort of the Cuban American sort of generation, that generation Indian that was sort of on the dawn of like coming on the scene and coming into their own. That sense of that we're taking bits and pieces of things and assembling ourselves in some ways. But then it stayed with me all my life, in the sense that who of us is not fractured? Who of us isn't made of bits and pieces of our history, of our families, of our experiences, and how all those things sort of come together in some magical way. Almost like a mosaic, or I think as Carlos described once, as a shattered mirror in which suddenly you see yourself, and each one is reflecting you, but it's always reflecting some other piece of you as well. So that's kind of how I've continued my work in that sense of trying to assemble myself through all these various identities and all these kinds of influences. And it extended itself throughout the years beyond just sort of the Cuban American idea to, as I stand here before you today, the first gay poet, engineer, living in Maine with bushy eyebrows. All of these multiplicities of identity and how all of us really sort of throughout the years are assembling ourselves. And I think that's part of what you see in Carlos's work, as well as I think in my poetry, is that sense of trying to uncover and surface and explore and exploit those fractured pieces of the South and assemble them in the way that art can do that. All those hats we wear, and not just sort of this simpleton sort of idea that we're this many things, but how these things collide, how they intersect, how they confront each other. And so what I'm hoping to do for you tonight is sort of keep that echo as I read through some of my poems, in that sense of how we come together as human beings, how each of us has this braided sense of identity. Another thing that strikes me as I look, I've always said the poem is a mirror. The poem is a mirror in which the author or the poet and the reader stand in front of. We're both looking at each other's lives. And that's really, really interesting when I look at my people, Carlos's piece, but to see yourself literally mirrored in that element. And how in that mirror, the reader or the viewer of a piece of art is looking at the life of the artist at that narrative, but is also looking at their own narrative. And it's this wonderful magic that only art can do. And I think it's just fascinating how that can happen. I have also, to add further, I have been a subject of Carlos's poem, which is a whole related, but also an incredible sort of experience in the sense that how I, and I remember it like it was yesterday, how you're transfixed and transformed into his narrative. You're not sure what's going on, but at the same time that he makes the photo and the magic of art and what he does sort of brings out the story of who you are. It's also part of his story. It's also part of that assemblage of that fractured sense of self and how it comes together in the photograph. It was an amazing experience, that idea of transformation, the idea of stepping into someone's narrative as if you could, as I like to think, that people can step into a poem, into one of my poems, and into anyone's poems, and become that narrative. And even though that story that's on the page is not about you specifically, it's kind of like watching a movie. The movie's not about you. It's not how you respond to it. It's the mirror. It's that magic of the mirror and the magic of art. So, just wanted to give you my little art picture for that moment. One of those central themes in my personal life is, of course, that fractured identity between cultures. And that dates back to way back from childhood up to adolescence. It's something that I think anyone in Miami can identify with, of course. And it almost sounds redundant to say this, but I'll say it anyway. That I grew up between two worlds. That there's the sort of two worlds of two stories. The one of my parents, the stories about Cuba, the pictures, the gossip, the letters that would come, all this sort of imaginary world that existed, this paradise that we were going back to someday, that was real and yet completely imaginary. But the other thing, and I think most Miamians can relate to this, and I think I'll quote, maybe misquote, but Liz Vaughn said, I think she was the one who coined this, that we love living in Miami because it's so close to the United States. And you don't need a passport. It's terrible. And so anyone who's old enough in this knows that there was a period in Miami where Miami was kind of like this purgatory. It was like a cultural purgatory between this imagined Cuba that we were going back to someday and this imaginary America that's what we saw on TV. It was, and back then it was the Brady Bunch, and it was the Leave It to Beaver and all those great ones. And I certainly grew up thinking that America existed. So part of why I started writing to begin with is, again, this idea of fractures. How do you reconcile those two worlds? And what is it? Or at least to begin exploring what that edge is. Why is there one thing on TV? Why is there another thing, at the dinner table? And another thing once you pass, let's say now, the Broward County line to West Palm Beach. It used to be the Dade County line, but I'm not sure. I think we've all sort of melded in a wonderful way. There's not that county division. Anyway, I like to read this poem first, even though it's an oldie and a goldie. Hopefully a goldie. But it bookends for me wonderfully. It was my very first assignment, my very first graduate creative writing course at Florida International University. And the assignment was write a poem about America. And we read Ginsberg and Robert Frost, and we read a few others, and Whitman, of course. And I went home and scratched my head because as a, so you're like about 20, you don't really know your Cuban. You just kind of everybody man who's Cuban like that. So I was like, there was no sort of differentiation. And I went home and scratched my head and I was like, what the hell am I going to write about? What is America? So anyway, this ended up, by serendipity, it was the first poem that became the first poem, the very first book that started me on this journey. And started this journey of sort of assembling, or at least trying to at least see how these pieces of the self work together, which has extended into much more beyond just a cultural identity. But I'll start with these sort of the genesis of what started that sense of being fractured. You should know, not even necessary for me, but I'll say it anyway. You should know that Cubans don't get Thanksgiving, probably Thanksgiving. You all know that pork is not the other white meat for Cubans. It's the only white meat. And you all know everybody hates Kennedy, all that, which is luckily the White House never read this poem. But I'm just quoting. Which would have been my defense. That and I was named after Richard Nixon. So this is America. This is the first poem that started me on the journey. Although Yamiya boasted she discovered at least half a dozen uses for peanut butter, topping for guava shells and syrup, butter substitute for Cuban toast, hair conditioner and relaxer, my mom never knew what to make of the monthly 5-pound jars handed out by the immigration department. Until my friend Jeff mentioned jelly. There was always pork though. For every birthday and wedding, whole ones on Christmas and New Year's Eves, even on Thanksgiving Day, pork, fried, broiled, or crispy skin roasted, as well as cauldrons of black beans, fried plantain chips, and yuca or mojito. These items required a special visit to Antonio's Mercado on the corner of 8th Street, where men in guayaberas stood in Senate blaming Kennedy for everything. Ese hijo de puta. The vial of Cuban coffee and cigar residue filling the creases of her wrinkled lips, clinging to one another's lies of lost wealth, ashamed and empty as hollow trees. I said then, I had grown suspicious. We were still here. Overheard conversations about returning to Cuba, I'd grown wistful and less frequent. I spoke English. My parents didn't. We didn't live in a 2-story house with a maid or wood panel station wagon or vacation camping in Colorado. None of the girls had hair of gold. None of my brothers or cousins were named Greg, Peter, or Marcia. We were not the Brady Bunch. And none of the black and white characters on Donna Reed or the Dick Van Dyke Show were named Guadalupe, Lázaro, or Mercedes. Patty Luke's family wasn't like us either. They didn't have pork on Thanksgiving. They ate turkey with cranberry sauce. They didn't have yuca. They had yams, like the diddles of pilgrims, I colored in class. A week before Thanksgiving, I explained to my abuelita about the Indians in the Mayflower, how Lincoln set the slaves free. I explained to my parents about the Purple Mountain's majesty, one if by land, two if by sea, the cherry tree, the tea party, the amber waves of rain, the masses yearning to be free, liberty and justice for all, until finally they agreed. This Thanksgiving, we would have turkey, as well as pork. Abuelita prepared the pork fowl as if committing an act of treason, faking her enthusiasm for my sake. My mom set a frozen pumpkin pie in the oven and prepared candied yams following instructions I had to translate from the marshmallow bag. The table was arrayed with gladiolas. The platted turkey loomed at the center of plastic silver from Woolworths. Everyone sat in green velvet chairs we had upholstered with clear vinyl. Only man gets that. Except for Carlos Betancourt, seated in the folding chairs from the Salvation Army. I uttered a bilingual blessing, and the turkey was passed around in a game of Russian roulette. Dry, Gilberto complained, and proceeded to drown the lean slices with pork fat drippings and cranberry jelly. La mierda roja esa. Faces fell when Mama presented her ogre pie. Pumpkin was a home remedy for ulcers, not a dessert. Del Maria made 3 rounds of Cuban coffee, then Abuelo and Pepe cleared the living room furniture, put on a celda cruz LP, and the entire family began to merengue over the linoleum of our apartment, sweating rum and coffee, until they remembered. It was 1970 and 46 degrees in America. After repositioning the furniture, an appropriate darkness filled the room. Gilberto was the last one to leave. One of those other sort of childhood memories that live in the land of the bizarre was the Miss America pageant, which for some reason was a really big deal in our house, and all the households shared that exactly right. I think it's a bizarre thing for everybody, I'm not sure. But, and this is, it's really interesting because I feel a little odd, even, at this, now that I'm 32, writing about my family still, and these sort of childhood memories, but even in the third book, there's these little things that still come up, and I'm like, wasn't there? So this poem is sort of just going back a little bit to that childhood memory and trying to at least propose some sense of that, again, of that sort of chaotic, sort of fractured world and what was going on. So this is the Miss America pageant at the Blanco household, betting on America. My grandmother was the bookie, La Bolitera, sat at the kitchen table that night, her hair in curlers, pencil and pad jotting down $2 bets, paying 5 to 1 on which Miss would take the crown that year. Abuelo put all his money on Miss Wyoming. She's got great teeth. As if complimenting a horse. Not her smile filling the camera before she whisked away like a cloud in a creamy chiffon dress. I dug out enough change from the sofa and car seats to bet on Miss Wisconsin, thinking I was as American as she because I was as blonde as she was, and I knew that's where all cheese came from. That wasn't all. Chocolate was from Miss Pennsylvania, the capital of Miss Montana was Helena, Mount Rushmore was in Miss South Dakota, and I knew how to say Miss Connecticut. Unlike Degoya, who just pointed at the TV, Esa, that one, claiming she had her sane figure before leaving Cuba. It's true, and then I have pictures, she declared, before cramming another bocadillo sandwich. Papa refused to bet on any of the misses because Americanas all have skinny butts. There's nothing like a big culo cubano. That's international for everyone agreed. Everyone. Except for me and my little cousin Julito, who apparently was a breast man at age 5. Reaching for Miss Alabama's bosom on the screen, the leggy mulatas sashaying and pumps, seducing Gilberto into picking her as a sure winner. She's the one. She looks cubana, he swore. And she did, but she cost him $5. Cojones! He exploded as confetti rained. Bird Park's leading Miss Ohio, the new Miss America, had a hand to the runway. Gloves up to her elbows, velvet down to her feet, crying diamonds into her bouquet, the queen of our country, our land of the free, amid the purple mountains of her majesty, floating across the stage and our living room. Though no one bet on her, and none of us not even me, could answer Mama when she asked us, "Chico, ¿dónde está Brian?" So we proceed to this fractured life that we have, even into adolescence and young adulthood. And this is a poem that I don't usually read, but I thought it'd be a nice touch for tonight. It's part of where I became as a poet. It digs back into my lifelong sort of experiences and friends in Miami. And I think what you'll see here is also this sort of how as artists in this wonderful landscape of South Florida, how we pull and piece things together. And this is a place that I think I've learned so much about what I was. It's called 324 Mendoza Avenue, number 6. Quick note on that, this is what we call a sestina, which means the end words of the lines of each line of poetry repeat, so they didn't run out of words. If you hear the same thing, it's a fixed form. The last time I drank vodka, I drank it straight in that chair. You played Streisand from your famous concert in Central Park. In '72, you said, and handed me the album cover which folded out. I read the gloss and statistics, largest public concert ever. Fuzzy aerial photographs of the mob and the aftermath, beer cans, wine bottles, rappers, while you sang, eyes closed to the music. If it wasn't Streisand, we played Wonder or a Bombo, always music. The Broadway classics you reenacted from your director's chair, West Side Story, Godspell, JC Superstar, with half a can of root beer and a joint in the same hand, and a little Newport parked in a garage sale ashtray. Calendars that seemed to last forever in candlelight umbrella. The incense stake in the lantern almost out. If there wasn't vodka, there was usually dark rum. If not, we'd run out to the liquor convenience, talk small talk about clubs and Latin music to the cashier. I'd flirt with her, get a 10% discount every time, promising I'd pick her up later and leave her bouncing in her chair, knowing I wouldn't be back. Not for her. Maybe for another 6-pack or a bottle that went dry about 1 a.m. Enrique tapping empty cans to a butter knife salsity, and everyone waiting to use the can. El Flaco bongoing, Maria Moroccaing, Loreto usually passed out in the air-conditioned room. Something like the Central Park scene in the album, and you, 1, 2, 3, unclouded, controlling the music, orchestrating the mad dancing and singing from your usual chair in your Chinese red slippers. The ghetto weekend view, easy as ever. With dub tapes, the 45s, the vinyl jewels we've kept forever at arm's reach. Nothing seems to matter. Not the stills, or the cans, the late rent, Ganita's health, the divorce, nor the broken dining chairs. Always the voice at 324. Elton or Duende, Hop or Latin, blocking out the off-key howls as you wrote the soundtrack, the background music of our lives. Merengue worries, some blues with holiday in the dark. Late night, we packaged one car to La Palma a la Ocho, parked at the to-go window. 6 cubanos. It took forever, but the food was our kind. The place had a native charm, its own music. The giant neon palm, the only place to get madeba in ice cold cans at that hour. The insomniac waitress, Linda, her bouffant all puffed out, and riffraff inside the restaurant, tequila out, and numb in their chairs. I still stop at La Palma when I can, at a sticky table with 3 chairs. I drink espresso. But remember the vodka, the music, Streisand singing out in the middle of that park in our lives, as littered as they may be, forever. Another poem that I think speaks to our fractured nature of those days. I don't drink vodka anymore. Drink cognac, no, I'm just kidding. This is a really interesting, sort of weird justice, and Carlos was there. We're waiting. I wonder if this restaurant is still there on 8th Street, because it's this wonderful French-Vietnamese restaurant. There's lines to get in. It's this little thing, like almost right across from Versailles. And we're waiting sort of to get a table, and there's one of these old, I think there's still some around, one of these old photo shops, one of these portrait studios that still had pictures of quinceañeras with the cape and feathers and the crowns and the tiaras and whatnot. And I was sitting there, like, and I started sort of like getting tears. And it was this recognition of sort of that there was this unique generation of Cuban Americans that needed, or not that needed, but that I wanted to give voice to, in that sense of that bridge generation. And so we were caught in that sort of space between this world that was changing right before our very eyes. And so the quinceañeras in this poem have become sort of a symbol of that sort of wanting to stay where you're at, wanting to hold on to those traditions, and then the inevitability of change that is also wonderful. Photoshop. These faces are 15 under faux diamond tiaras and grandmother's smuggled gigantes. These faces are pierced with mangled smiles that dress hopeful Teresitas and Marias, quinceañeras with coffee bean eyes. These pearl faces are mothers tapped at a dream, a decorated anguish in painful pink manicures. These young faces can't remember that last day, the innocence of their small steps into the Barreller plain, drifting above palms, waving elegant farewells. These barefoot faces are those red mountains never climbed, a Caribbean never drunk. They are Guajiro sugar never tasted. These faces are displaced Viritas and Susanitas. These faces are 50s revolution. They are the Beatles and battles. They are Celia Cruz, Azúcar, loud and brown. These faces rock and roll their bars. They are Erie Botanicas and 7-Elevens. These fiery faces are rifles and bongos. They are maracas shaking, machetes hacking. These faces carry too many names. Their white eyes are toppling dominoes. Their glossy eyes are rum and iced tea. Their African eyes are gods and Christian saints, haloed with the finest Arabic smoke. These faces rest an entire ocean of Taino eyebrows. They are Kennedy, Batista, and Nixon. They are a dragon in uniform. These faces are singing two anthems nailed against walls. The walls are chipping. These overflowing faces are swollen barrels with rusting boots and corset seams straining. These faces are beans, black, red, white, and blue, with steaming rice and chick china. These faces are pork fat and lace gowns. These standing faces are sentinel. When the Vietnamese kitchen next door stops, when the alley veils itself and closes like a fresh riddle, when the flower shop draws in buckets of red carnations, when gold and diamonds are pulled from late windows, when neon flashes relieve the sun over these fading faces. These chromatic faces are nothing important. They are nada we need to understand. They will transform in their photochemistry. These faces will collage so very Americanly. So to give you a little bit more of an adult perspective on one of the lasting ideas of this being fractured is not only going back into your childhood and sort of seeing these sort of documenting your own history as it happens subconsciously, but also now as an adult, now that I'm 28, you realize how your life is colored by this even as an adult. We call it knowledge, knowledge is great. And so there's this sort of way that you're still trying to assemble something, and it's amazing to think, sometimes I think, oh, this Cuba thing, right? And then these things pop up. One time, I went to take my partner Mark to Marco Island, and I had been there since I was a kid, back when there was the Marriott Hotel, and there was a few buildings, and that was it, and the 7-Eleven, the young platinum, So I took Mark, I hadn't been there for 25 years, to take a trip down memory lane, show him where I played in the sand and whatnot. And of course, as we all know, everything's up for it to change every 5 minutes, and it wasn't the same Marco Island I remember, by far. I got really angry and pissed, and I was like, how dare they, do this to my Marco Island? And then I was like, oh my God, I need my parents. And they used to complain about, can you believe it? Pintaron la casa de su madre en azul, or like in Cuba, when they would paint somebody's house a different color, it was like blasphemy. How dare they change or when they would change the name of the street. And I suddenly caught myself in this nostalgic rant and understand that it's kind of this really universal human condition. Where we want things to stay the same, and yet at the same time, we realize they can't, and yet how do we move on and sort of begin almost reassemble those pieces. So this is Marco Island, and my home that dealt with that experience. Looking for the Gulf Motel. There should be nothing here I don't remember. The Gulf Motel with mermaid lampposts and ship's wheel of the lobby should still be rising out of the sand like a cape decoration. My brother and I should still be pretending we don't know our parents and embarrassing us as they roll the luggage cart past the front desk, loaded with our scruffy suitcases, 2 dozen loaves of Cuban bread, brown bags bulging with enough mangoes to last the entire week, our espresso pot, the pressure cooker, and a pork roast reeking garlic through the marble lobby. All because, we can't afford to eat out. Not even on vacation, only 2 hours from our home in Miami, but far enough away to be thrilled by the whiter sands on the west coast of Florida, where I should still be for the first time watching the sun set instead of rise in the ocean. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My mother should still be in the kitchenette of the Gulf Motel, her daisy sandals from Kmart squeaking across the linoleum, still gorgeous in her teal swimsuit and hammered earrings, stirring hot arroz con pollo, adding sprinkles of onion powder and dollops of tomato sauce. My father should still be in a terry cloth jacket, smoking, clinking a glass of amber whiskey in the sunset at the Gulf Motel. Watching us dive into the pool, 2 boys he'll never see grow into men who will be proud of him. Should be nothing here I don't remember. My brother and I should still be playing Parcheesi. My father should still be alive. Slow dancing with my mother on the sliding glass balcony of the Gulf Motel. No music, only the waves keeping time. A song only their minds hear 10,000 nights back to their life in Cuba. My mother's face should still be resting against his bare chest like the moon resting on the sea. The stars should still be turning around him. There should be nothing here don't remember. My brother should still be 13, sneaking rum in the bathroom, sculpting naked women from sand. And I should still be 8 years old, dazzled by seashells and how many seconds I hold my breath underwater. But I'm not. I'm 38, driving up Collier Boulevard, looking the Golf Motel, for everything that should still be, but isn't. I want to lend the condos their shadows for ruining the beach in my past. I want to chase the snowbirds away with attacking the mansions and yachts. I want to turn the golf courses back into mangroves. I want to find the Golf Motel exactly as it was and pretend for just a moment that nothing I've lost is lost. The other thing that sort of affects me as a older man, 25, keeps getting younger. I got that travel now, and I think that sort of happens when you do actually have some money to travel, especially as a postdoc. We go through this travel part, and I'm just like, look at the songs, you gotta go here, you gotta go there. And it made me think a lot about this, this idea of travel. And I don't know about everybody else, but I think this is a primordial sort of thing. Our sense of travel, whatever you say, there's this underlying mission of finding paradise, right? There's a sense of, only I move to Sao Paulo, if only I move to Miami, if only I move, my life problems will go away. You're there on a cruise for 2 hours, and it's like, I gotta go there. This is really, screw Miami. Screw Fort Lauderdale. There is always this sort of primordial idea that we're always searching, and in some ways, it's that immigrant spirit as well. There's this sense that we're in some ways almost genetically trying to find that paradise and that Eden, that Shangri-La, that Avalon, that thing that we were separated from. It is in so many sort of mythical stories. I think Carlos was on this cruise, and so was that one of those places was Malta, which is happening on a cruise that we had been on. And so this is sort of a funny take, or sort of an exploration on that quintessential sort of dream of that paradise, of that unification with Eden. You should know one thing for this, these really boring lines in here are not mine. They're taken from the brochure. I'm playing with language here, so chastisement. We're not going to Malta. We're not going to Malta because the winds are too strong, our captain announces. His voice like an oracle coming through the loudspeakers in every lounge and hall, as if the ship itself were speaking. We're not going to Malta, an enchanting island country 50 miles from Sicily. According to the brochure of the tour, we're not taking. But what if we did go to Malta? What if, as we were escorted on foot through the walled silent city of Media, the walls began speaking to me? And after we stopped a few minutes to admire the impressive architecture, I feel Malta could be the place for me. What if, as we stroll the bastions to admire the panoramic harbor and stunning countryside, I dream of buying a little Maltese farm, raising Maltese horses in green Maltese hills? What if, after we see the cathedral of Malta saved by a miracle, I believe that Malta itself is a miracle? And before I'm transported back to the pier with a complimentary beverage, I'm struck with Malta fever. Discover I'm very Maltese indeed, and decide I must return to Malta, learn to speak Maltese with an English or Spanish accent, work as a Maltese professor of English at the University of Malta, and teach a course in the Maltese Falcon. Or what if, when we stop at a factory to shop for famous Maltese ware, I discovered that making Maltese crosses is my true passion? Yes, I get a Maltese cat and a Maltese dog, make Maltese friends, drink malted milk, join the Knights of Malta, and be happy for the rest of my Maltesian life. But we're not going to Malta. Malta is drifting past us, or we are drifting past it. An amorphous hump of green and brown bobbing in the portholes with the horizon as the ship heaves over white caps, twisting into rainbows just a moment, and then dissolving back into the sea. Still haven't been once. My mother, you gotta know my mother, she's like, man, that's right. Mother goes to Egypt, sees the pyramids, yeah, they're nice. She just wants to be able to boss with the church ladies and whatever she is. Anyway, this next one was a little bit of a departure in some ways too. This was, there are constants in that, like pieces that perhaps are not fractured, and one of those, having grown up in South Florida and so many amazing memories at the beach, is this constant backdrop, is the sea, right, the ocean, the shore, whatever you want to call it. This constant sort of memory that is always fixed and never changing, and yet always changing. And this comes from a moment, actually, with one of our conversations, where he said one day casually, but you notice that every time you come out here, it's different. The ocean's different, the sea's different. And hence this poem. Some days at the sea. The sea is never the same twice. Today, the waves open in lines now as hungry for the shore, and I feel the earth helpless. Some days their foamy edges are laced with my feet. The sea is sheet of green silk. Sometimes the shore brings souvenirs from the storm. I sift through spoils of seagrass, find a broken finger of coral, a torn fan, examine a sponge's hollow throat, watch a man of war die as a sapphire in the sand. Some days there's nothing but sand, quiet as snow. I walk eyes on the wind, sometimes laden with silver-tasting salt, sometimes as still as the sun. Some days the sun is a dollop of honey and raining light on the sea, glinting diamond dust. Sometimes there are only clouds, clouds, clouds. Sometimes solid as continents drifting across the sky. Other times, wispy white roses that swirl into tigers, that swirl into cathedrals, into my hands. And I remember some days I am still a boy on this beach, wanting to catch a seagull, or cup a tiny silver fish, or build a perfect sandcastle. Some days I'm a teenager, blind to death, even as I watch waves sink into nothingness. Some days I'm a man, tired of being a man, sleeping in the care of dusk slanted light, or a man scared of being a man, seeing some God in the moonlight streaming over the sea. Some days I imagine myself walking this shore with feet as warm as driftwood, old and afraid of my body. Someday, I suppose, I will return someplace, like waves trickling through the sand back to the sea, without any memory of being here. But, if I could choose my eternity, it would be here, aging with the moon, enduring in the space between every grain of sand, and in the cusp of every wave and every seashell's hollow. I gotta read two more. I'll just read this one and then we'll continue on to question and answer. But one of those sort of ways that the idea of being fractured and identities has complicated itself was, of course, sexual identity. And for years, to be honest with you, I hadn't come out in my poetry, and I wasn't sure why, and I felt very guilty about it. In the ways of like, why am I not telling this story? And I realized in this third book that I was waiting for the story to tell itself in some ways. I was waiting to see what was unique about my story that made me make sense to tell it. And one of those ideas was what I think is the sense of cultural sexuality. And that it's not the same to be a Cuban American gay man who grew up in Westchester with bushy eyebrows, as it is to be an Asian American gay man growing up in New York City, and the permutations go on and on. So I thought, okay, here's sort of this interesting way in which, again, my sense of fractured cells sort of break together and collide and intersect. And to my grandmother, who was a little kid, as you already met her, I think a little bit, who was as homophobic as she was xenophobic. So that anything that was culturally strange to her was also perceived as sheer faggotry. And it wasn't that complicated. Things like Fruit Loops. Things like, anything she couldn't quite think out. Okay, so when we in Cuba, things that were in Cuba were pretty much, in my case, gay. So, needless to say, made my life hell on two fronts. I was like, okay, I gotta do things. I didn't know where I stood. But it's really about that sort of, everybody has a person like this in their family, right, in some ways. That well-intentioned, loving person that loves you to death and kills you. I made peace with her, and actually when I wrote this poem, I thought it was a really angry poem, and I was like, I don't know if I can publish this, and it was like, because it was deep. And then the first time I read it, people started laughing, and chuckling and laughing, and I realized, man, I still can't get even with her, but anyway, this is my grandmother's take on being queer. Queer theory, according to my grandmother. Never drink your soda with a straw. Men don't use straws. Milkshakes? Maybe. Stop buying your mother's Avon catalog and the men's underwear, those Sears flyers. I've seen you. Stay out of her Tupperware parties and perfume bottles. Don't let her kiss you. She kisses you much too much. Avoid hugging men, but if you must, pat them real hard on the back, even if it's your father. Must you keep that cat? Don't pet him so much. I know. Why don't you like dogs? Never play house, even if you're the husband. Quit hanging out with that Henry kid. He's too pale. And I don't care what you call them, those G.I. Joe's kids are dolls. Don't draw rainbows or flowers or sunsets. I've seen you. Don't draw at all, no coloring books either. Put away your crayons, your Play-Doh, your Legos. Where are your Hot Wheels, your laser gun and handcuffs? Those knives I gave you. Never fly a kite or roller skate, but light all the firecrackers you want. Kill all the lizards you can. Cut up worms. Feed them to that caterpillar. Don't sit Indian style with your legs crossed. You're no Indio. Stop click-clacking your sandals. You're no Kurz girl. For God's sake, never pee sitting down. I've seen you. Never take a bubble bath or wash your hair with shampoo. Shampoo is for women. So is conditioner, so is mousse, so is hand lotion. Never file your nails or blow dry your hair. Go to the barber shop with your grandfather. You're not unisex, are you? Stay out of the kitchen. Los hombres don't cook, they eat. Eat anything you want, except deviled eggs, blow pops, croissants, bagels, maybe, cucumber sandwiches, and definitely no petite fours. Don't watch Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie. Don't stare at the $6 million man. I've seen him. Never dance alone in your room. Donna Summer, Barry Manilow, the Captain, and Neil, and all musicals forbidden. Posters with kittens, Star Wars was queer, or the Eiffel Tower forbidden. Those fancy books on architecture and art, I threw them in the trash. No, you can't wear cologne or puka shells, and it better not catch you in clogs. If I see you in a ponytail, it's coming off. Okay? What? No, you can't pierce your ear, left or right side. I don't care. You will not look like a goddamn queer. I've seen you, even though you are one. For the sake of time, I'm going to just skip a little bit, but I did want to just mention, just in terms of, maybe for your own thoughts, one of the other pieces of identity for me is also how, what I've chosen, I'm an engineer and a poet, and how these things are also sort of part of the fractured whole in a sense. Part of the reason I studied engineering was, of course, because of the quintessential sort of immigrant or exile story of your children wanting you to do better and study something that's financially, going to do a better future, and et cetera, et cetera. So there were these sort of social economic circumstances that led to that. So that story is weaved into there, but it's also weaved in many ways into what you just heard about my grandmother. So the idea of doing or pursuing anything that was cisheage was struck the fear of God into me. So all these layers sort of like, again, are braided together, and somehow it makes each one of us unique. But I will skip just to the Wednesday, which is, I think you know that poem, right? So, it's my favorite piece right now in life, actually. It's interesting. And what I've been telling you, I think if you understand that in some ways what was behind a little bit of, or maybe a lot behind this poem is that, well, what is America if not that braided, fractured identity? I mean, that sense of how we all have to come together and assemble this thing called America. So there's this individual sort of assemblage, but there's also this grander scale of things. And that's what's part of what I wanted the poem to do, is to understand that each one of us is a little piece of the mosaic that makes a country. And I'm talking everything from the lawyer to the stockbroker, to the truck driver, to the poet. Everybody sort of is part of that fractured whole. And in some ways you realize, as a young country, America is still, in some ways, very much still trying to figure out, and it's figure itself out, and it's very exciting. For me, that experience of the inauguration was important in many ways, and I'm right now finishing a memoir about the whole experience. And I'll read you a little piece of that and then rewrite it as a poem. Because it wasn't just a creative journey, it was an emotional journey, it was a spiritual journey, it was so many things that I'm only starting to realize really even now. But here I am sitting on the platform, Beyonce is insisting on giving me a kiss, and I tell her no. You're gonna have a little fun here too, you know what I'm saying? So I'm sitting there, and it was the most unexpected feeling I've I really wasn't expecting this. And again, sort of one of those moments where we feel that assembly maybe has come together. In the moment, I feel America standing as one, putting differences aside and taking a deep collective breath. We pay tribute to something far bigger and more important than any one of us. Though I truly feel I am one of us, one of we the people, and the echoes on the platform. I embrace America in a way I never had, feeling for the first time that I belonged, truly belonged, to one country. Not an imaginary ideal from TV, nor a nostalgic island floating in the sea of my parents' memory, a real, tangible place that is mine, was mine all along. I turned to my mother and whispered, "Mama, I think I'm finally an Americano." Indeed, I realized it was always one story I was born into. One story for me to discover and claim, one story to make my own. At that moment, I understand one today as my gift to America. Senator Schumer introduces me and calls me up to the platform. My mother squeezes my shoulder. I stand more confident than I imagined I could or would. Transfixed by the moment, which is no longer about me or my home or my glory, but about America. Still, I'm surprised when the President and Vice President stand up to greet me and shake my hand on my way to the podium. They both whisper something in my ear that I can't make out. But their gracious gestures speak silently to my heart, as if saying, here is your country. This is your story now. I step up to the podium, look out over the crowd, a quilt-work of lives, of stories spread across our ground, under our sky, beneath our one sun. I take it all in. I take one deep breath and then another. This is for them. This is for all of us, I think to myself. And I begin speaking into our land. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, America, one today. One sun rose on us today, kindled over our shores, peeking over the Smokies, greeting the faces of the Great Lakes, spreading a simple truth across the Great Plains and charging across the Rockies. One light, waking up rooftops, under each one a story told by our silent gestures moving behind windows. My face, your face. Millions of faces in morning's mirrors, each one yawning to life, crescendoing into our day. Pencil yellow school buses, the rhythm of traffic lights, fruit stands, apples, limes, and oranges arrayed like rainbows, begging our praise. Silver trucks heavy with oil or paper, bricks or milk, teeming over highways alongside us on our way to clean tables, read ledgers, or save lives. To teach geometry or ring up groceries as my mother did for 20 years, so I could write this poem.